Hi, welcome to part 3 in our segment of Realism and Impressionism art. In this segment, we're going to be looking at the work of Mary Cassatt and the influence of Japanese prints on artists during this time period. In April of 1890, the School of Fine Arts in Paris showcased an exhibition of Japanese woodblock prints. These ukiyo images, pictures of the floating world, as they were evocatively called, were comprised mostly of scenes of urban bourgeois pleasure. Geisha girls, really beautiful women, sumo wrestlers, kabuki actors, and pictures of the landscape and the natural beauty of Tokyo, or the area called Edo, which is present-day Tokyo. And so these sort of landscapes of Mount Fuji, use lots of images of cherry blossoms, rain showers, surging waves, were also featured as well. Ever since the Commodore Matthew C. Perry helped to open the Imperial Japan to Western trade in 1853, Europe had become fascinated with Japanese culture. We saw that earlier when we were looking at the art of the Americas and the transatlantic trade, where a lot of goods traveled through the Philippines into the colony of New Spain. These Japanese goods, like the Japanese folding screen, the biombo that we looked at, shows you the sort of influence that Japanese culture had on the West. And so artists like Edgar Guido, Monet, and Vincent van Gogh, who we're going to look at later, were really among many artists who were influenced and incorporated elements of Japanese design into their work. And so the craze of Japanism, Japonisme, became very popular during this time period. And what you're looking at is a print by Utamaro, and again, this is an example of like a geisha girl or a bourgeois woman in upper society. And you can see that she's fixing her hair. So Mary Cassatt, this is her image that she did called the coiffure in 1890 to 1891. It's dry point and aqua tint printmaking on paper. And here you can see the influence of the Japanese prints. You have a woman adjusting her hair, and this is one of many hundreds that Mary Cassatt made in her home studio in the summer and fall of 1890 and in the winter of 1891. And it was inspired in part by a woodblock print in her personal collection. This is what she had, this one by Utamaro, two young women kneeling back to back, dressing their hair. And so definitely you can see, these sort of the influence, definitely with the patterning, often when you incorporate patterns, it really does, flatten the image. And then obviously the subject matter, these sort of intimate moments of women, and it's different. It's not sexualized. It's just these moments of women in their everyday lives getting ready. The coiffure also had its art historical roots in old master paintings as well. Definitely, I think we can see some influence of Ingres Odalisque oh my God, who did this picture? I think Raphael. This picture of one of these bathers, but here you see that her method really departs from these sort of conventional models and becomes definitely more, it's not so much about the sexuality and eroticism of the women, but more about her examining form and composition in her print and sort of working out these formal elements. The word la coiffure, I think that's how you say it, and that means it's this idea of a woman styling and arranging her hair. really does provoke a certain type of image of a wealthy, glamorous woman in a setting, and this idea of ritual grooming and dressing. And, you know, definitely, and this is a print done by Jerrod. It's a magazine illustration. And to wear an elaborate hairstyle like the ones that you see here featured, you would need the help of a maid with one's hair. And, you know, obviously we think of, you know, these ritual groomings of Marie Antoinette, and, you know, during the 1700s, and her wigs and her really elaborate hairstyles. And this was passed down to 19th century ideas of femininity and beauty. Obviously they didn't do it to the extreme that she did, but it was an important feature in terms of how they presented themselves to society. So la coiffure was really part of a specific lifestyle in terms of these sort of upper class women. Yet the woman in Cassatt's prints is tending to her hair alone, so she doesn't have the help of a maid. Perhaps what we are seeing is a working woman getting ready to start her day. The counterpoint of the print's title and the reality of its subject matter characterize the ironic tension within the image. I mentioned this earlier, but the woman in La Coiffure, unlike Rembrandt's Bathsheba, which you have over here, and Ingres's Odalisque, is also not sexualized. Though her breasts are exposed, her chest and the details of her body are deliberately muted into an overall structure of curves and crisp lines. This is an exercise in clarity and tone where the subject, the woman's body, is a compositional element in the picture, as vividly realized as the other significant patterns of the room, the wallpaper, the fabric, the armchair, and the carpet. So definitely very different viewpoints. And it's interesting, too, because you have a female artist depicting a woman, and then you have two male artists depicting women, and they're quite different in terms of, I think, the eroticism. You know, definitely these women are more objects and you know, images to be gazed at, while this woman is definitely evokes a more intimate scene, and it's very charming. So as the viewer, we are placed at a slight leftward angle from the woman in the chair so that we see her through her reflection in the mirror while she's looking away from it. The downward gaze is similar to that of the model in the Utumaru print. It's done partly in a homage to the modesty of the female subject in the Ukoyo-e prints. Artists were always aware that their works were made for a male-dominated market and designed them to be enticing, and partly as a study of shape and line so that the viewer, realizing that he or she is not looking at a psychological portrait, could focus more intently on the compositional elements of the work. The prints provided artists with an opportunity to showcase their skill in conclusion, using no more than is necessary to convey the idea. We're going to look at some other artists as well in the Impressionist that Mary Cassatt was friends with and influenced by. The curves of the woman sloping back and the neck echoes the curves of the chair, which stand in contrast to the vertical lines of the mirror, a compositional counterpoint that further enhances the tension within this tightly composed scene. The limited color palette of shades of rose, brown, and white enable us to focus closely on the form and clarity of line. It also mimics the quality of pastels, which Cassatt, like her friend Edgar Degas, often liked to use. So this is an example of one of Edward Degas's pictures, and again, he was very figurative in his work, and he used mostly pastels. And again, he was famous for doing these really beautiful images of women and ballerinas and bathers. Through the process of how dry point and aqua tint etching that Mary Cassatt used, La Coiffure combines Cassatt's propensity for hazy shading and the soft tones with a bold sharpness and line, allowing the artist to integrate these qualities of two different mediums. So you have this sort of ability to incorporate the hard and soft. And that is something that is very characteristic of, I think, a lot of Japanese art. And when we look, we are going to study Japanese art in a later unit. But I think that definitely is a convention and something that was attractive to her as an artist. Her desire to emulate the haziness and sensual and suggestive possibilities of pastel is what motivated her not to use woodblock printing, which is what the Japanese the technique that the Japanese prints were made from, but intaglio. First, Cassatt carved her designs onto a smooth copper plate with a fine metal needle. Then the plate would be dusted with a powdered resin and heated until the resin melted in teeny mounds that hardened as they cooled. Acid then added onto the metal plate, would bite channels along the resin droplets. The deeper penetration of acid produced richer, darker tones, a sort of velvety richness, with a lighter application of acid producing lighter shades of color, and a variety of nuanced gradients could be generated within a single print. And so she was able to kind of get these, still have this idea of mark making in line in her work, but also have this sort of gradation and softness in terms of the tonal quality as well. Once Cassatt had replicated a certain number of images from a plate, she would incise the plate with a needle so that no one could use the same image again. Let's look at another print by Cassatt. This is the companion piece to La Coiffure. It's entitled Woman Bathing. I'm sorry, I don't have the title up there. I should have that. I will correct that as soon as I can. Another image of a woman who is bare-chested and half-dressed, grooming before a mirror. Cassatt was inspired in partly by some of Degas's pastels of women grooming, as we can see here in this image. And in Cassatt's prints, the time-honored boudoir scene we see in Titian and Bellini become de-eroticized and reappropriated as a skilled exercise in form. So again, this idea of the female nude in a sort of sexy boudoir, like the Venus of Urbino, sort of laid out on this couch, sprawled out in view of her Duke. It's very different. It is this idea of domesticity, but again, it's more intimate and not eroticized as the way it is in some of these male interpretations of women. So again, it really is more about this exercise in form, shading and line. In the spirit of the Yuko-yi and Impressionism, these prints capture fugitive, fleeting moments. Again, so remember that's a very distinctive convention of Impressionism, these sort of fleeting moments. Monet with this idea of light and the reflection of light. And also these just sort of, moments that we don't really think about in terms of our everyday lives. And, really just trying to capture the moments of these busy lives of the Parisian bourgeois as well as the working class. Cassatt's motivation in making the prints was to make her art more accessible for a large audience. She believed that everyone, regardless of income or social position, should be able to experience art and to own works they enjoy. This is a quote: "I believe nothing will inspire a taste for art more than the possibility of having it in the home. I should like to feel that amateurs in America could have an example of my work, a print or an etching, for a few dollars. That is what they do in France, It is not left to the rich alone to buy art. The people, even the poor, have taste and buy according to their means. And here they can always find something they can afford. So really, she was one of these forefrunters in terms of, again, producing her work on more of a mass scale. Printmaking allowed her to do that, but also, allow her work to be purchased by a different type of audience, not necessarily the aristocrats and the bourgeois society, but the working class and even the poor. This philosophy of art for the masses wasn't always popular with Mary Cassatt's contemporaries. John Singer Sargent and the art historian Vernon Lee, who viewed Cassatt's printmaking as a delusion of her precious talent. So they thought the opposite. They thought that by, making these prints and making multiples and distributing them, it sort of took away from her talent and diluted it. Yet Cassatt understood that as the world was changing with the 20th century, new industries and technology, more and more people would have the income, the education, and the ability to experience art in ways that they hadn't been able to do before. And so really, she was smart. I mean, she really was aware of how times were changing and the progress that was being made, and, was adjusting, to profit from that. So, very smart woman. Mary Cassatt also did prints and paintings of mother and child images. Mother and children were popular visual subjects long before the 19th century. It wasn't until after the Enlightenment, however, that images of maternal these maternal sort of interactions were accepted in the context other than representation of a Christian subject. So really, most of the images that we had seen of mother and child were the Madonna and child images before. And so beginning with the writings of Rousseau and other enlightened era thinkers, people began to view childhood as a treasured moment in human development rather than a mere step to productive adulthood. As a result, children were increasingly seen as carefree, innocent, and deserving of protection. Their nudity in art was commonly used as a symbol of natural purity and vulnerability. As views of childhood changed, so did ideas about the role of mothers. Women of the upper class were encouraged to be more active in the daily lives of their children, and works in the and artwork started to illustrate these activities. And so women were encouraged, not to hire a maid or a nursemaid to raise their child, but to actually interact with their children and raise them. And so you do have, scenes of bathing and nursing and soothing that became subjects in art. So the common use of wet nurses were increasingly discouraged, not only by male philosophers and medical doctors, but also by an emerging feminist movement. As with today's breastfeeding advocacy, mothers in the 19th century were taught the benefits of nursing, both of them in terms of public health, but also as a means of fostering healthy emotional and physical bonds with their children. So works such as this, Maternal Caress by Mary Cassatt, really do celebrate these very tender interactions between mothers and their young children. And this was a subject that she did revisit a lot. Again, very much influenced by Japanese-ism, and so definitely the use of patterning and the use of line. There is this sort of flatness and elegance that she achieves with her prints. And this is just a close-up so you can see some of the details. She also did paintings, and this is another very famous image by her, The Child's Bath, done in 1893. Oops, sorry. So Mary Cassatt spent most of her life and career in France. She was an American, where she was an active member of the elite social and artistic circles. In the late 1870s, she forged friendships with innovative painters, including Edward Degas, and really became the only American artist to be officially associated with the Impressionist. At the end of the 19th century, many artists turned to the mother and child theme as an updated version of the Madonna and Child, but Cassatt made it her specialty. As you can see, through her experiments with painting, pastel, and printmaking, she captured the daily lives of women and children, uniting a traditional subject with new artistic techniques. So, later works such as Maternal Caress often focus on the child, demonstrating Cassatt's sensitive observation of young people growing up in a modern world. And so here you can see that the influence is on the children, and as well as you can see here with this depiction of the child's bath. And so this is a different medium. This is one of her oil paintings, and she did a lot of different techniques. She did printmaking, she did oil painting, and as well as working in pastels. So I'm going to stop here. Our next segment, we have one more artist to look at. We're going to be looking at the medium of sculpture and the artist Rodin. So stay tuned for part 4.